Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our parenting podcast here at North Park Community Church. My name is Matt Loveday. Thank you for joining us. And joining me today is this wonderful woman over here. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Krista McClanahan. I'm the Director of Children's Ministries here at North Park.
Awesome. And we're glad that you've joined us today. This is actually our second podcast, which is kind of exciting in the parenting podcasting world for at least me. Last month, Josh and I had a conversation here around this table that centered on our sermon series on the book of Revelation. Because, we really feel that family ministry is so important, that parenting conversations are really important. And there's certain things that come up from time to time where we just want to be able to have maybe a better or a more informed conversation with our kids. And sometimes it's just nice to hear from other people what their perspectives are. So I brought in a resident expert here in Krista. So this time we're going to talk about something different. It's fall, of course. We've had beautiful weather the last couple of days here. Trees are beautiful and colorful. Fall is a favorite time of season for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you. But what would you say your favorite thing is about fall?
Well, the older I get, the more I have an appreciation for the change and the colors. I don't think I got into that when I was younger, but strangely enough, fall is birthday season at my house. So both of my kids and my husband all have birthdays within 3 weeks in kind of September, early October. So that's kind of fun.
So the fall's full of
really
parties
like cake,
for you.
So, it's a good time.
That's good. So you're not when fall comes, it's the pumpkin spice latte. You're not obsessed over something like that.
Totally
It's
not.
just birthday season. It's birthday cake. Yeah. That's fair enough. Fair enough. Well, of course, one of the major things that happens every fall is Halloween, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about Halloween because I think a lot of people have a love-hate relationship maybe sometimes with Halloween. I mean, we love the fact that, kids love that they can dress up. They love that they can go door to door and get free candy from people. What's not to love about that? But then, of course, there's the scary costumes. There's the incredibly creepy house decorations that are around. There's a lot of things that for people of faith might cause us to question and be like, is this really something we should be participating in at all? So that's where kind of I think the tension comes every year in fall for a lot of families. So what does your family do? Do you guys celebrate Halloween? How do you handle Halloween in your household?
Yeah, we have been celebrating Halloween. I grew up with, I guess, that as a tradition, although my faith background is different than North Park. So it never was a question because that was just the norm for us. But, my husband and I both grew up that way. And we started with the kids when they were little. So they have continued to want to dress up as long as they can. And my daughter's now in grade 8 and it's a bit of a battle. I'm like, I think you're getting a little old for this, going to other people's houses to get candy when you have your own money. You could buy it on November the 1st for half the price. And we actually really enjoy the giving candy part because, I'm a fan of children and it's a fun opportunity to see some of the people in the community. Last year at our house, the previous owners, we just moved, and the previous owners came back to see us with the kids dressed up for trick-or-treating. Yeah. So it was fun.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point where some of the tensions do lie, is that it's a great time for connecting in your neighborhood. Our kids go out trick-or-treating too. They love to get candy, of course, and see the neighbors. We usually, we send them out just within our close neighborhood. Yeah. It's kind of one of those things to people, mostly the houses that we know and people that we're associated with. But yeah, we kind of go out for Halloween as well. And I think that really this is a decision every parent obviously needs to make for themselves. There's no kind of thing in this. There is some tension in it. But the reality is that people go all out for Halloween sometimes, right? And this is where, for me, I don't know how I feel about it, where there's some houses in our neighborhood where it's scary. There is the ghosts and this whole thing of death. And especially for younger kids, it can be really extreme. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, for me, the greatest tension lies. I know that there's obviously there are spiritual implications and even a spiritual history to things, but I don't think Halloween, I feel, is like many other holidays in our westernized society, is it's so consumerized, right? Like I read something recently where like people spent $500 million on like pet costumes at Halloween last year or something. Or there's those, I know, right? but people love this, just a holiday, right? They don't necessarily associate it with some of its historical roots or some of those things.
Yeah.
And yet, I think that's a question for me is, why does Halloween have to be so scary? Like, we don't let our kids dress up in scary costumes. I don't know about you.
No, we definitely don't. And I personally have never been someone who likes to be scared. I've never enjoyed reading things. Like, I don't get into thriller novels or movies or anything like that. I don't enjoy being scared, so I don't really get that. I think I can get around that maybe people are entertained by the adrenaline of that. I can see how that would maybe appeal to people, but as a parent of a child with anxiety, Halloween has always been absolutely love, hate. Like, the excitement of dressing up and going out and getting candy, and that part is all exciting. But, you know, there's emphasis put on things at school, and there's readings or there's videos or whatever. And we just knew for the last couple of weeks of October, we were going to have to be dealing with stuff at home because it was an offshoot of what was exposed at school. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't get the need for the scary.
Well, you said something earlier about, I think some people like it for the entertainment value. Mm-hmm. Now, I wouldn't choose to be entertained in that way, right? But some people really love it. Like, we have some neighbors who every year, their teenage son loves to just sit really still on the porch. And like, when people come up to ask for candy, like, he'll make a sudden movement or make a sound. Right. And people love that. And I think even at Halloween, I do think sometimes people really enjoy the scariness of it. But this is where, for me, I wonder, why do you think people like to be afraid? You mentioned earlier, like, maybe it's like an adrenaline rush or something. And there is something built into our bodies, right? When we are frightened, our body releases adrenaline, right? It's that fight or flight response. And so there is a real bodily attachment to fear that jolts us into some kind of action. And I think that this is my maybe working theory, that I think that the fear of something like Halloween or for entertainment value, it's a known fear. Like, it might surprise you, like, when you're watching the videos on YouTube or something, and all of a sudden, like, something screamo comes up and it's supposed to scare you. So, I think for that, it gives people the adrenaline, but they know ultimately they're safe. It's not really a long-term implication of fear, but it's this short-term jolt of fear that kind of boost them up. They know that it's a safe environment, right? So I'm going on with this a little bit, but like a haunted house or something, they know they're going into an environment where I'm going to be scared, I'm going to have these emotions, but ultimately I'm safe, right? Like my neighborhood. So, but this is where maybe we can take the conversation a little bit and steer it somewhat away from Halloween, but talk about this idea of fear, because, fear is a very real emotion, and there are very real things to be afraid of in the world, and they aren't necessarily controllable by us, or we know that ultimately we're going to be safe from that, that come into our lives, our kids' lives. So how do we have a better conversation with our kids about fear? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, what you said is really important, in the same way that happiness and joy and sadness and frustration are real feelings. Fear is a real feeling. And I think it would be unfair and unwise as parents to try to bubble wrap kids from the experience, or to disregard the feelings if they're having them. It's fair to feel scared, and to give it its time. But from the place of faith and understanding where we come from, we can also try to educate our kids around, how they can build an expectation of that it doesn't need to stay there.
Right.
They don't have to live in fear. It's okay to experience it and give it its time, but we don't have to have to stay there, and it doesn't have to last forever.
That's right, because there's a big difference, right, between, as we've said, an experience of fear, that might come through something at Halloween, but there are very real fears of, going to school every day, attachment issues, or anxieties and fears in that way, and it's important that we help maybe our kids differentiate between those fears, and then once they kind of can identify the source of those fears, be able to deal with them, or coming from a place of faith, we would say be able to pray about them.
Absolutely.
And find support for them, because sometimes the fears that we have in life we can have comfort or support in the process, right? So I think that's a really important thing, and all the times when we talk about these conversations with our kids about, last time I mentioned talking with Josh about Revelation, these are ongoing conversations, right?
Totally.
Like, it's not like you have one conversation with your kid about something they're afraid about, and you're like, there, we've dealt with that.
Yeah.
It's going to be something that kind of keeps, I think, coming up all the time. And one thing too, maybe direction I could ask you about this as, working with kids here at the church is, for younger kids, how do we help them as opposed to older kids? Like, I think sometimes we feel like older kids, for something like Halloween, they can handle more fear. Does that make sense? But younger kids, sometimes we feel like we need to protect them a lot more from that fear. But the realities of that there are these things in the world that are going to be kind of fear-inducing. Is there a different way? Is that even a fair question? Is there a different way to treat fear in younger kids as opposed to older kids?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert. I mean, first of all, if you don't mind me circling back a little bit, I really do think it's important that we learn to distinguish between anxiety and fear.
Yeah.
And my understanding from the experiences that I have is that with fear, there's like a known target. There's like a known source, and you can identify that. And anxiety is just like a generalized dread, and you can't necessarily pinpoint, which is why it can be so devastating, because you can't identify the source, and so you don't know how to remediate it, right? But with fear, it's like there's a point. So I think it's important that we try to distinguish those things. So sorry about backtracking there a little bit. But
I think that's really great, because you really have identified something. As I said, it's an ongoing conversation, right?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to deal with talking about fear or being scared at Halloween, because it's a season.
Yes.
But the season comes and the season goes, and then you're like, well, we won't deal with that again until next Halloween, maybe, right? But with some of these ongoing fearful situations that go throughout the school year or go throughout their, lives in various relational capacities, there is a differentiation that needs to be made between, as you say, like momentary kind of fears, but ongoing kind of fears, or as you say, going into this anxiety place where you can't really necessarily pinpoint it on one thing. Yeah. So how do we help journey and navigate through those things? So no, that was a good circle back, Krista. Well
thanks.
done.
In terms of your other question, my opinion, and it's just that, is like all other things, I think, with parenting, we just need to keep the conversations open and going, and keep things developmentally appropriate. If we decide to hold off and not talk to our kids about what we think is a taboo or a naughty subject or something like that, inevitably the kids are going to find out in another way, and we've lost our first first exposure impact. So just recognize, or just maybe be aware we're in a season where fear is real. Might as well open up the conversation, or find literature that's developmentally appropriate for the kids, and just tackle it head on, so that they know to come to you first, and know that the conversation is always ongoing. And you and I both know you could be in the middle of baking cookies or putting cheese on your pizza, and suddenly your child is asking you a question that has nothing to do with either what you've been talking about or what you're currently doing, and they just kind of drop one of those bombs on you. But that, for me, is evidence that the conversation about whatever is always open, and it's on their mind and coming. It'll just come back to them. So, I think you just deal with it.
And I would say as well, I think, you kind of touched on it a little bit, is have the conversation earlier rather than later,
Yeah.
right? Younger kids are less regulated in how they kind of express their emotions, right? Like you talk about a toddler or, if they're scared, if they're upset, if they will let you know.
That's right.
Right? As we get older, we can sometimes learn to suppress those emotions or handle them in other ways, which can be positive, but can also be negative, right? We can direct those things in other ways. So with younger kids, I think when they are expressing fear or anxiety, or I would just say any kind of big emotion, it's never too early to just kind of give them assurances, start a conversation, acknowledge the big feeling, talk about the big feeling, that it's not something that has to be hidden, because often those big feelings, when they're hidden, they actually become more powerful.
Absolutely.
So as parents, I think it's really key to engage in those opportunities. As you say, maybe we're baking cookies or putting cheese on the pizza, but it comes up, I need to have this conversation. It might not be really long because my kid's not looking. I say this often. Our kids aren't looking for a download.
Right.
They're looking for a discussion.
That's right.
And sometimes the discussion happens by bit by bit by bit by bit. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that for me is what I think about when I think of the difference between older and younger kids. I think we handle it the same way, but we start a conversation and we give assurance. And I think as parents of faith, for myself, I think it's important to bring a spiritual perspective and a God perspective into those emotions.
Yes.
So before we kind of take a turn to kind of wrap things up here on our discussion today, I think it'll be really important for us to talk about this idea of fear from a biblical perspective, because there is a lot of instances in the Bible where people were afraid.
Yes.
And so what does the Bible have to say about fear? And how do we have conversations with our kids in a spiritually enlightened way about the realities of fear? So do you have some examples or thoughts from the Bible about fear, and maybe some advice you'd give in speaking to kids about those big emotions that we feel like fear?
Yeah. Well, my expertise is not in the littles with preschool. And so I would definitely defer to somebody else about it, even though I've lived through it raising toddlers. But when kids are definitely in school, I think we can be real with them. I mean, Jesus says you're going to have trouble and trials. And, wrapped up in that, I assume he's saying there's going to be just some rough times in life. It's not going to be awesome all the time. And then he uses one of my favorite words that he ever uses, and he says, but, right? He says, but do not fear, because I've already overcome the world. So Jesus, who's the person we're modeling our lives after, is assuring us it's not going to be perfect all the time. It's not going to be happy all the time. You can expect negative emotions, negative experiences to be coming. Not that you want to live in feeling depressed that it's never going to be good. But he does tell us to expect these maybe seasons of it. And he says, but don't fear about it. Don't stay there. Don't live in it, because your hope is in me. I've already overcome the world. And then my other favorite scripture about it comes so much for me. I was very fortunate when I was a young Christian. A lot of scripture that I was learning was embedded into song, and music is a really vital part of my life. And someone in the community that I was in had written a song about God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power of love. And the wording they used was a sound mind, but in other translations of the Bible, it says in self-discipline. And so that's something that particular verse, which was turned into song, that's something that I would sing to my kids when they were little and experiencing things, that it's okay that you have this emotion. Just know that God didn't give that to you. Instead, he gave you this, and these are the tools that you have to use to overcome the fear.
Yeah, that's really good, Krista. And, the Bible does have a lot to say about fear. So you're right, and I'm clearly identifying to our kids that it's okay to have these emotions, right? Sometimes they come beyond our control. and yet there's something that we can know or actively do with those and those fears or those big emotions. And just as you were talking, I was thinking too of just this imagery of Jesus as the good shepherd, right? And Psalm 23 is such a well-known psalm, but it talks about, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, right? I will fear.
It's bad. It's really bad.
Right? But that's the whole idea. But I will fear no evil, that even though I am going through this fearful, hard, difficult situation, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, right? And I think as parents, we so often give that assurance to our kids, and it's often the first place that we should go as a parent, right? Like, our kids fall down, they hurt themselves, whatever, we rush over to them. Don't worry, I'm here, I'm with you, everything's going to be okay. And I really think that the scriptures reveal to us a God who responds to us in very much the same way. That says, in this moment of pain or fear or uncertainty, I'm here. I am with you. It's going to be okay. You're in my big, strong arms, kind of thing. So that was the image that came to me.
Great.
And I think too of the, with perfect love casts out fear, right? And of course, we don't always experience perfect love in a broken world. Our parenting relationships, our family relationships aren't perfect love, but we see this perfect love expressed through Christ. And we're always moving towards more and more living within that love. And so, I guess maybe to bring it some ways back to Halloween, we send the boys out to connect with neighbors. We send them out to enjoy candy and a season and have some fun. We emphasize those things. But we have a real conversation too about why people are wanting to, put ghosts and goblins on their lawns, and we have an open, honest conversation about it, but we also try to bring the love of God into that and say, God is with us, God is with our neighbors, God is with, our friends and our family. And yes, sometimes there's things that are scary, but we've got this community of people, we've got our family, we've got God who's with us. So anyway, it's those types of assurances that I think go a long way, especially when it does come to fear.
For sure.
So I don't know. I hope that I hope this has been a helpful discussion for those of you who have been listening in. It's certainly not a complete discussion, as Krista has said. We're not experts.
No.
We share our experiences, we share our opinions on things, and we respect that others are going to think and make different choices. And that's what I love that about North Park, that we do really center ourselves on this hope and this joy of Jesus that we share as a community. But there would be a lot of people who have a lot of different feelings, and some people would have a very strong feelings about Halloween, and we respect that. There is some stuff out there that I think we really have to have our eyes wide open. We can't just be unaware of what is taking place around us. But anyway, I think it's worth continuing a conversation.
Agreed.
With your kids, with your family, with your friends. Talk about it. I think that's what we want these conversations to be: is to be conversation starters, initiators. So,
well, and I think accept the reality, whatever stage of parenting you're at, and especially if you're in the younger stages. Let Matt and I reassure you that it's okay to feel like you don't know the answers, and it's okay to say that to your kids too. You can assure them that you can either look into finding more answers, or sometimes we just don't have the answers that only God knows. And on this side of heaven, we just don't get to know some of the answers of some of those big why questions, like why would God do that, or those kinds of things. That's tough stuff. Yeah. But it does take humility to say to your child, I know I have a hard time understanding that too, but I trust. So I just want to assure you that it's okay to not feel like you don't know the answers, and you don't need to feel like you need to be false with your kids about pretending to make up something so you have an answer for them. It's okay to say, I don't know, but we've got an amazing, powerful Lord and Savior, and we're going to trust him despite being in the valley in the shadow of death or whatever place we're in.
Amen. I think that's great. And I think that's a good place to leave it for today. Thank you for joining us for the podcast. We look forward to doing another one. Who knows what we'll talk about next? But as we said, it's always going to be something that points us towards a conversation that centers around Jesus. So this fall season, blessings to you and your families. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.